All I can say is thank the Lord preseason hockey is finally over with. It has not been a fun time for the Winnipeg Jets.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at @LivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we have some stuff to talk about. The Calgary Flames and Winnipeg Jets preseason game is just wrapping up here, final few minutes. But I've seen enough to give some overall thoughts on preseason, what we saw in this last game, and the fact that the Jets might now be dealing with a legitimate injury crisis. I don't know how serious some of what happened tonight is. We have yet to hear any formal announcements. We'll have to wait until after the game, and hopefully the diagnoses are not too bad. But yeah, things are not feeling great for Winnipeg right now. It's a little bit tense, and I want to dive into why and what's kind of stood out over the past couple of games, and what we can kind of think about for next week, obviously, as the season will officially get underway. But before we do, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So let's chat about Winnipeg Jets preseason hockey. It's not been great. I think there have been some fun moments where we've gotten to see a couple of standout performances from some of the youth. A couple of the new veterans I think have actually really fit in. I'll just say right off the bat, Cole Koepke has been a great find. And I think of a lot of the new arrivals, he's been the most impressive. I would also say Gus Nyquist has done some solid work. He seems like a really decent middle sixer, a player with some good finishing ability. In tonight's game, he had a goal and an assist. So, overall, pretty happy with his performance. He was kind of cleaning up some chances and sort of doing the poachery stuff that I've come to expect from him, right? Nyquist is never going to have the fastest feet like he used to, but I think what you want from him is really smart offensive zone work, and that's what he's shown so far. Maybe he's not going to be Ehlers, and he's going to have some limitations to his game that aren't quite the same as a lot of his maybe younger contemporaries. But I think for what the Jets need as a stopgap, Gus is going to be fine. I'm going to refer to him as Goose because we already have a Gus, and Goose just sounds way funnier and way cooler. Every time he scores now, I'm going to have to yell Goose, so just be prepared for that. But as far as like preseason has gone otherwise, I think the biggest storyline has really been the defense, right? This Jets team, their back end is looking a little ragged. We knew it was going to be rough with Sandberg out, but now DeMello took a bit of a knock against the Flames. He didn't come back to the game. And so you're seeing some D pairings that kind of rival some of the worst combinations we had back when we had like top pairing Lucas Abisa. We had, Joe Morrow, Nate Beaulieu, that kind of defensive structure. I mean, Fleury, Stanley, all those guys are doing the best that they can, but it is very clear that these D groupings are a little overmatched. And when you have Heinola and Miller in the press box, I don't quite get it. I'll be honest. Heinola and Miller, either or, look, you're not going to solve the Jets' defensive issues. I don't think that either of Heinola or Miller are just a cure-all. But in terms of at least trying to find some sort of improvement and stabilization for your back end, a little mobility, a little puck-moving ability, maybe some cleaner exits, just something to help out, this probably would be a better solution than what the Jets have tried to do. Stanley and Pionk is not a pairing that I think really works well. Fleury, Shen, also not a particularly great pairing. Fleury can still skate with the puck, and he showed a couple of offensive rushes and even got himself a goal. But you also saw some of those moments where, there was a puck that went from high to low and hit his stick, and immediately a Flames player seized on it and scored a goal off of that. I don't know if I could even call it a turnover because it wasn't really that. It was almost like a shot deflection. But it's just, yeah, Winnipeg is running really ragged. And I think to have all of this happen right before the start of the season, on the one hand, it is probably not as bad as it could be since it's happening during preseason, and we already have at least a couple of days into Sandberg's recovery, so that's positive. But coming into the start of the season where the Jets are going to have some really tough opponents, all of this kind of hitting early and putting the Jets under some early duress, not great. Taves tweaked something and he's day to day. You have Lowry, who's obviously still rehabbing. Sandberg now out long term. We don't know what happened to DeMello. Perfetti also took a knock and did not come back to the game. So not sure if it's just precautionary or what. It feels a little bit dicey. And of course, you see me listing a point here to talk about the health of the team because I think this might start to become a real talking point and early storyline to start the season is how healthy this team is really going to be. And already we're already dealing with quite a few injuries, and the season hasn't really started. I apologize. I think my Baltimore Ravens fandom may have bled into the Jets' health situation. It seems like this is already starting to become a little bit tricky. And so, I think it's hard to read a lot into this preseason and take away anything significant other than the fact that I think the Jets are going to have a tough year, especially to start. Murat Atesh just put out an article at The Athletic that said the Jets will struggle and you shouldn't write them off yet. But yeah, I think if even The Athletic is kind of reading the tea leaves here, it's going to be very obvious that the Jets, they just need help. I think preseason has shown that offensively, Winnipeg doesn't have a lot of scoring ability. They've got good forechecking and some fun players, but as a whole, this team definitely is struggling to find pay dirt. They don't have as much offensive pop as they did in previous years, and it could be a little bit of a leaner season. Now, I don't know that I'm necessarily looking at this team as missing the playoffs just yet, but if they have a really tough start to the year and things maybe kind of spiral a little bit early on, I don't quite know what to expect otherwise. Hellebuck, if he is even remotely shaky to start the season, could be a bit of a difference maker in the opposite direction. This defense is looking really rough. And for whatever reason, Heinola and Miller don't seem to have any of the inside track on any of these spots. Heinola, I can sort of understand, but at least Colin Miller's like pretty decent, right? As like a third pairing blue liner, at least, why not put him in there? Surely he can at least do some sort of a job on the right side or even the left side. But yeah, at this point, it kind of feels like you are sort of patching a bit of a leaky boat. And I think that's kind of the early vibe I'm getting from the start of this season is the Jets are a very leaky boat. I think that there's a lot of stuff that they're really holding on to hope for something to pan out with. And I feel like they're putting a lot of eggs in a basket that's not very secure. So not to be like a downer about it, but I do feel like in preseason, we've kind of seen some of the concerns expressed. We've seen some really strong depth play from like your fourth line looking really good. You've had some solid shifts from the middle six. And it's not like it's all bad, but the weaknesses in particular look like the kinds of things that might hurt earlier than the preseason or earlier than the playoffs. I was kind of talking about the Jets maybe not being built for the regular season, but or built for the playoffs, but the regular season might be a little bit trickier for the Jets too. So, going to be an interesting one. And as I'm recording this, of course, Parker Ford just scored the tying goal for the Jets. Ford kind of having up and down performances so far during the preseason. But, I think it just speaks to the fact that the Jets are trying to find goals from almost any source possible. And I think offense is going to be at a premium for this team this year. And kind of, folding into that, of course, is this injury situation where a lot of key guys are already getting hurt for the team. And it might be more of a concern than I thought heading into the start of the season. We'll chat about why and how the Jets might be able to survive all of this in just a brief moment. But before we do, wanted to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Hey, friends. Of course, if you are watching the NFL season, it has just kicked off a couple of weeks in. There have been some crazy upsets, some spectacular games. I've watched my team blow a few crazy leads. As a Ravens fan, you heard me talk about that earlier. Not been the best season for me, at least. But you know what? If you're a Bills fan or maybe even a fan of the Chiefs, you might be feeling pretty good. And FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss, especially if you're following along with the action. Right now, new customers can put down just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to win even more. You can put down bets for everything from player props to performances in game, who you think might win the MVP trophy, which teams you think are going to emerge victorious this coming weekend, or even the Super Bowl champion. No matter what, though, the only way to play is to visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started on your drive for victory. Hey, thank you so much for joining us back on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are chatting a little bit about some preseason takeaways. I feel like I am being maybe slightly overly pessimistic about some of this, but based on what I've seen from this Jets team, for the first couple of games here, it's not feeling ideal, and I kind of felt like some of this was going to be an issue. The 5v5 offense kind of up and down, especially from, certain lines that are still trying to gel together. But really, one of the biggest early storylines before the season starts is injuries and health. Now, with Taves, we kind of knew that that might be an issue, right? Coming off 2 years of time off away from the game, having dealt with long COVID and trying to rehab and get back into physical shape, not even just game shape, but just physical shape, period, that's a lot of time. And he is your 2C. So, the expectations for Taves kind of high. A lot of responsibility for a dude who has not played in 2 years. And I think for the Jets to ask that of Jonathan, it's a little ambitious. And, already he's dealing with something that he tweaked, which I think is, maybe not a concern that I initially had. I wasn't really thinking about maybe muscular injuries, maybe some joint stuff. But, it does track that at his age, 38, maybe that is a bit of a concern. And if he does have some of these issues pop up throughout the season, maybe those signing bonuses and performance bonuses and games played bonuses start to make a lot more sense. If he's really not healthy enough to play much this year, it does make me wonder how many games he's actually going to be able to contribute. Now, again, his current injury is day to day. It's not serious, but I think the fact that we're already seeing it just a couple of games in the preseason tells you that his recovery process is still going to take some time. Even when he's at his full health, relatively speaking, he may still take a few knocks and not really be 100%. So, we're going to see some improvisation, I think, with some of these lineups. I would not be shocked if Nemesnikov at 2C starts to become a more consistent theme. Even when Taves comes back, maybe they keep that to try and load balance. I just feel like that is already one concern. You have your second best defender on the team already out long term, which is going to put a lot of stress on the blue line. And it feels like Arniel and company haven't exactly found good deep pairings to try and paper over that. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that they should immediately call up Elias Salamonson and to have him play minutes. I do think Salo is actually ready for NHL duty, but it might be a little bit much to ask him to start this season and immediately contribute. In the meantime, though, you have to at least figure out some way to get these two pairings that are not Morrissey and DeMello to work, right? And if DeMello's injury from this game is in any way, shape, or form longer than a game or two, the Jets are going to really have some tough times. Winnipeg really can't afford to lose just about anyone else. And already we're seeing, multiple injuries to positions where the Jets don't have a lot of depth. If Perfetti's knock is anything more than just, a precautionary pull, again, the Jets don't really have a lot of depth to call on. They've sent a lot of guys down to the Moose. Immediately we might have to see at least one recall sometime in the next few weeks if more than one player is injured. It's really not feeling like a great start. So, Winnipeg is going to have to really survive these next few weeks. working on very thin rosters. And traditionally depth has been a strength for Winnipeg. I don't feel like I'm getting that sense right now. In fact, it feels like a lot of the depth is already actively starting for the team, and you are having to call upon even more reserves as this season kind of gets underway and preseason wraps up. So, yeah, injuries already playing a much bigger role than I anticipated. I thought the Jets would comfortably make the playoffs this year, at least as like one of the upper seeds in the Central. No, not first necessarily, but towards the top of the pool. All of this is already putting a dent in that. Sandberg being out puts the Jets more to 500 territory, maybe worse. I just don't know how this team is going to be, handling more of this adversity, especially if their solution is like Stanley Pionk and Fleury Shen. That's not really a solution. That's not going to get you to the promised land, and it might actually make the regular season drive a lot harder, especially if the Jets slip early. So, this was always going to be an interesting year, I think, where there was a lot of uncertainty. The health question, even just for Taves, was already a situation. Now we have even more questions to answer with respect to health. And so this team feels like it's already a little bit behind the eight ball. And I don't know how Chevy's going to react. This is a very different scenario than we're really used to. So, how the Jets respond to this, how a lot of the players handle the pressure and intensity will be very interesting, right? I think Winnipeg has shown in the past a real perseverance and fighting spirit, but that can only take you so far. You can't just outrun fatigue and wear and tear forever. So hopefully, whatever all of this is, it's a short term situation. If Winnipeg can survive and make it through the next few weeks, into November and December, still clinging around to a playoff spot, that would do a world of good for their odds to make the postseason. But, I just don't know if I'm expecting that anymore. So, going to be a very interesting year. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from the season. I say interesting, and I'm not really expecting a lot of top end performances from this team. I think Winnipeg's going to take a step back, and I think the injuries are not going to help. I think it's going to make guys rusty coming back into the lineup too, so that could have some level of impact. But the Jets didn't have the best offseason. They didn't make a lot of high end moves that would necessarily fortify this team for the future. You have a lot of stopgaps, and I think we're going to kind of see what happens when you do something like that over the course of the season. These veterans that they've brought in, some of them have a lot of winning experience, but a lot of them are on the older side, and with that comes health challenges. So, all I can say is buckle up for the next few weeks. It could be very interesting. If the Jets survive this stretch, especially to start the year, they can probably survive just about anything. I don't want to jinx it necessarily, but it does feel like this is kind of the biggest and toughest stretch already, and the Jets haven't even dropped the puck on the start of the season. So, gonna be a very curious next few weeks, and we'll have to see if the Jets try and bring back anyone from the Moose, maybe somebody in case there's an actual injury that we have yet to really see. All I can say is wishing the Jets the best of luck. Gonna be a crazy season, and if things don't work out super well, and maybe the Jets narrowly miss the playoffs or even miss significantly, I'm not really upset. This year, I've always kind of looked at as maybe a transition point of some sort, maybe a retooling. Not quite sure what to make of it yet. We haven't even had the first game, so there is a lot of season to go, and maybe this team really rallies around triumph over adversity, triumph over early injuries and setbacks, and they go on to have a deep run. Whether it's the regular season or the playoffs, but they are facing some tough early odds. And I want to talk about, how they can survive this over the next few weeks, what it might entail, and who really needs to step up for the team in order for them to get through this stretch and hopefully come out on the other side with a winning record. Hey, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us tonight's show as we're just wrapping up with some final thoughts. Winnipeg, obviously, I just has mentioned, is dealing with some real adversity, And, it's coming before the season even starts, which on the one hand is maybe the better timing comparatively speaking. You don't want it to happen during the season when you're already a few games in or even many games in and suddenly you have to go really shorthanded. Better to have it at the start of the season where maybe your opponents are going to be less organized. Teams are still figuring out new acquisitions and rosters, all that fun stuff, right? A little more chaos, a little more uncertainty, and it might give the Jets some breathing room to figure something out. But all that said, the Jets really are going to be in survival mode for the next few weeks while they're without Sandberg. Sandberg is their single most important player that's injured right now. And, if any of Taves or Perfetti or DeMello are not okay as well to start the season, things start to get very interesting. You're going to have to ask more of guys like Nyquist, Nemestikov, Niederreiter, probably to a point, Iafallo. And, I think a lot of the pressure for this season, even before the injuries, was going to fall on the top line. Now the pressure has to be absolutely immense. You could be without Perfetti for, maybe the start of the season. I doubt that. I'm sure he's probably okay. But, imagining worst case scenario, you might be down one of your more skilled forwards. You might have to deal with Taves popping in and out of the lineup. You still don't have Lowry. A lot is going to ride on this top line being able to answer the call in a way that maybe it hasn't before. Can this Jets top line really win its matchups? Can they show the dominant form that they showed against bad teams last year more consistently, right? Is this line capable of being towards the upper echelon of NHL first lines? So far, we haven't seen that consistently, but that doesn't mean that they can't sort it out sometime this season. It's not likely, and I don't know that I'm really leaning that direction, but if ever there was a group of players that you really need to stand up and to kind of assert and dominate, it's probably this top line. You're also going to have to see Morrissey really be on his AAA game, not just A game, but AAA game. DeMello, even when healthy, has been slowing down a bit, so it's not like he's been, immune to some of those issues. We've seen him struggle occasionally with the speed of the game, a couple of turnovers, some mistakes, stuff that's uncharacteristic of DeMello, and really it's just age related, right? He's slowing down, he's getting older, and that kind of stuff really does take a bit of a toll on your ability to keep up. So Morrissey is going to have to really elevate himself to carry that pairing. And that's, before you factor in the Jets blue line kind of being a total mess past the first pairing. Stanley Pionk probably not going to work super well. Even Stanley Shen, I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in. Any combination here of Pionk with either a Fleury or Stanley is going to have vulnerabilities. Any combination with Shen will probably have vulnerabilities. The Jets really need to think long and hard about whether or not these pairings are what they want to go with to start the season. I'm not sitting here advocating that you just throw a bunch of random players in, but as it is right now, this Jets blue line is not going to be defending a lot. So all I could say is good luck to Morrissey and DeMello. They're going to have to really be breadwinners here. I don't know that the other guys are necessarily going to be able to elevate their game in the same way. Pionk did during the playoffs last year, so he has a chance to really light it up, but that's also asking a lot of him, and I just don't know if his game's going to be at that level. Elsewhere, you're probably going to need Hellebuyck to stand on his head. I think Helly has had some okay performances to start the year. This Flames game, not particularly great. So, the first real long-term action that he's seen, 4 goals against, not feeling great about that. Some of it not really his fault. Some of it kind of, the Helly that we're not really a fan of seeing, but it just is what it is. It's sloppy preseason hockey. The Jets defense has kind of hung him out to dry on some key moments. So, yeah. This is going to be a very crazy start to the year, compared to other seasons where you had more depth to rely on. When I really think about the top line, Hellebuyck and Morrissey needing to stand up at a higher level than they have previously, it's because, the guys behind them that they have trying to back them up don't really have a lot of offensive jump. They've got lots of forechecking and even some strong defensive work, but beyond that, you're really going to have to hope that your top stars honestly carry the load for the next month or two until they can kind of hit that safety point where at least Sandberg or Lowry comes back. It's going to be tough sledding. Even with at least one of those guys back, it might still be tough sledding. This team is not super deep up front, and without a major trade acquisition or maybe a Moose call up that's really been hitting it off, I don't know where they're going to find more offense from. So, this start is all about surviving, make it through, stay at least, above 500 if you can, try and keep yourself in the playoff race, and see if you can do that, right? If Helly is in Vezina form, I think the Jets can definitely make it through. But if he even looks slightly mortal and the Jets defense isn't really there to back him up, it could be a tougher start. So the next few weeks are going to be really telling. I've spoken at length about what I've thought about the Jets lineup. I think it has, some imbalances. I think we're still trying to figure out if Taves can even play at this level consistently because, the brain and hands and skating seem to be there. The health, though, might be a bigger question mark. And if that's the case, that is going to put some additional pressure on guys like Nemesnikov, Lowry, and whoever to really step up and try and fill those middle to top six center roles. Scheifele also going to have a lot more pressure now that the top line has to perform and carry more of the load. So, this team, all I can say is they really need help, and I don't know if the front office is willing to give it this year. It feels like the Jets are going to be patient and wait it out for as long as humanly possible. I don't know if that's going to be good enough this season. So, curious to know your thoughts on all of this. How are you feeling about this preseason? My general vibe is that I've not really been overly impressed outside of like some of the kids and some of the standout performances from guys like Kepka. There's been some freak stuff that the Jets really couldn't do anything about, but the overall impression I get is that this team is just not that strong, and I worry about it, right? If this is supposed to be your first of 3 years in your competitive window, this team does not feel like one that's going to be destined for a particularly deep playoff run. I need them to show me something really special this year, and so far during preseason, we definitely haven't seen that spark. So, coming into this game next week against the Stars, you have some bad memories, you have some painful memories. It's time to turn things around and get the season underway. But let me know how you're feeling about all this. Do you agree with my assessment? Do you think I'm barking up the wrong tree? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Next week, we'll talk about the start of the season. We also have some official top 100 NHL player rankings from the Locked On Podcast Network. And I also want to talk about how the rest of the league and media kind of views this Jets this season. Because I think a lot of folks are higher on the Jets than I personally am right now, but maybe it's just me. So we'll talk about that next week. But for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here next week. So have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.